To all of you online, just stay with us. We'll get started as soon as we get everyone in. The book of Revelation. Sorry, is that too loud?
Not for me.
All right. Okay, those of you online, I think we're about ready to get started. We have a few people in now, so we'll get going. All right, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the blessings that we have received so far this week. We ask that you will continue to go with us, be with us throughout the remainder of the week. But we ask you, Lord, that tonight that you will bless us in a special way as we think about the wonderful things that you have prepared for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, tonight's going to be just kind of fun. In fact, Gabe, would you mind in the video room back there, there's a mic laying out. Would you grab that and make sure that's on? That way those online can hear if some of you have comments. We're sort of just going to have a good time tonight. We've done some heavy lifting in Revelation. But tonight is not so heavy. It's more just having fun together, thinking about what God has prepared for those, as Revelation says, that love Him. All right. We have seen, of course, this last couple of chapters of Revelation, the devil tied up, thrown into the lake of fire. And those that are in rebellion with him, they also suffer the same fate, and we have noticed that. And they come up, surround the city, the New Jerusalem, and fire comes down from heaven and destroys them. Well, what about heaven itself? We looked at the first part last week of Revelation 21, so now we're going to pick up. Once again, you know how John does. We've been over this so many times. He'll give a view, then he'll come back and expand on it. The first part of chapter 21, he talked about there will be no more crying, tears, former things are all passed away, and so forth and so on. Now he gets more specific. But here are the first couple verses, just by way of review. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now we skip down to verse 9. We pick up the second part of his view as now he gets more detailed in what he's talking about. Then came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues and spoke to me. Now notice you get some unusual grouping of things in Revelation, and this is one of them. The angel that pronounced in Revelation the seven last plagues which, of course, as we know, are the plagues that fall on those that have rebelled against God and will not repent. So now that same angel comes back and gives an entirely different picture. So, first of all, the plagues, and now that same angel is coming back talking about something else. Then came one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues and spoke to me, saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." Now he's talking about the city, the New Jerusalem. We know Revelation also, of course, refers to the redeemed as the bride. But here, it refers to the city as the bride, which is kind of interesting. In sense, anytime we talk about heaven, there's a lot of just speculation, right? Even John, when he describes these things, he does them in terms that really, when you look at them carefully, don't make a lot of sense. Is there any such thing as transparent gold? Gold by nature is opaque, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a chemist, but I have never heard of any way to make gold so it's transparent. Right? I mean, gold is opaque. So he talks about that in Revelation, gold and it's transparent. So we see a lot of those kinds of things in Revelation that kind of, we just have to let our imagination go wild a little bit. But here we have the city, the bride's wife. And the reason I was mentioning what I just said was the throne of God is a living throne, isn't it? Do you remember from our earlier, we spent quite a bit of time on that, both in Ezekiel and in Revelation. The throne that God is on, what's it made of? Living creatures. Remember? And the living creatures, there are these 4 living creatures, and they have 4 different faces, remember? Kind of weird stuff. Anybody remember the faces? A lion. One looks like a person, right? One was a eagle, and the other one was a bull, I believe, wasn't it? In any case, it's a living throne. And that's weird. You think of a creature now, and you look at this creature, one side it looks like an eagle, the other side looks like a man, the other side looks like a lion, etc. That's some pretty strange stuff. And so we have now the New Jerusalem, and if the throne of God has living qualities, I'm just throwing this out. I'm not putting a lot of weight on here. This is pure speculation, okay? And I don't even know that I believe it myself, but whatever, it's just fun to think about. And that is, could the city itself have living qualities? If the throne that we think of as a stationary object is really a living, movable throne, does the city itself have living qualities? I don't know. Anyway, the city is called the bride's wife. You do whatever speculation you want to. But the stuff in Revelation, really, when you stop and think about some of it, boy, the imagination of the people that did Star Trek, etc. John had them beat a long time ago when it comes to things that are imaginative. All right. So come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. All right? So now he looks and he sees this massive city coming down. Can you imagine a city? Now that's a spaceship, isn't it? It's not falling apart. It's not. A city, if you tried to lift a city up, what would happen? It'd just fall to pieces, right? Now here, this is moving and it's coming down. This is a spaceship. So it comes down from God out of heaven. Having the glory of God, its radiance like the most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. I don't understand all that, do you? I don't understand. But anyway, he's describing the best that he can what he is seeing. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel inscribed. Now, I chose not to develop that tonight, and maybe we should come back and do that sometime. But that brings up the whole issue of Israel. And as you know, the dispensational teachers of Bible prophecy, they make a big deal out of the Jews are saved one way and the Gentiles are saved another. The Jews are saved by keeping the law and the Gentiles are saved by grace. You know, and they get into these things that really are New Testament foolishness. But in any case, anyone that goes into the New Jerusalem has to be what? You have to be a Jew, correct? Because over each one of the gates there's what? A name of one of the 12 apostles, signifying that if you are entering in. We know, of course, in New Testament terms, Paul makes it abundantly clear that if we belong to Jesus, then we are what? Abraham's seed, and then we are heirs according to the promise of the New Jerusalem. And, you know, that's what most of the book of Galatians is about. So here we see now that we have these names of the 12 tribes of Israel inscribed above. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west there are 3 gates to the city. And the wall, by the way, we'll see in just a moment, there's no reason for the gates. I don't understand that either. The gates are never shut. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations. And on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. You see, tying together the people of the Old Testament, the people of the New Testament, all redeemed, Revelation says, how? By the blood of the Lamb, right? Old Testament and New Testament. And the one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold. Now, I have never had a tape measure made out of gold, have you? Anyway, this angel does. Apparently gold's not very valuable in heaven. A measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and its walls. The city was perfectly square, as wide as it was long. The angel measured the city with his measuring stick. It was 1,500 miles long and was as wide and as high as it was long. It's a cube. Maybe that's where Star Trek got its idea, you know. The Borg. Okay. But it's a cube. Now, if we place that cube in the U.S., starting down in New Orleans, going right up through Memphis, and a little bit of it's running off the screen, but going up just over the Canadian border, and going west out to Las Vegas, that's a pretty big city. Right? All right. Here's Memphis. You can see the population density here. And those lighter spots are developed areas. Obviously, the darker spots are greenery. That's the city of Memphis. We have a big city. Metropolitan area, 1.3 million people. Right? 1.3 million people in the metropolitan area. Memphis is not nearly as dense as some cities by population. I mean, you take New York City, you know, there are more people in 3 blocks than we have in the whole city here. That's an exaggeration, but I mean, you know, it's much denser than it is here. So, anyway, there it is. And then we go out a little bit, and now you can see Memphis. You can still see it there, and you can see a little bit of development. But, I mean, Memphis doesn't take up a whole lot of land area, does it? Even though it's a big city. So this city now, that the New Jerusalem, is going to take up that big area that we just represented on the map. If the population density was the same as Memphis, you could put 2.5 billion people in that city. All right? If the population density was the same. If the population density was Tokyo, you could put a few billion more. So, but think of it this way. Memphis is mainly a one-level city, right? You have a few apartments that are 4 or 5 stories. There's not much in the way of high-rises in Memphis, for housing. But this one now, this one goes up 1,500 miles.
So do they live on levels?
Huh?
Do they live on different levels?
All I know is the wall is not that high. So obviously he's talking about the buildings. The buildings in the city are 1,500 miles tall. What's the tallest building that we have in the world today? What's that?
I don't follow the borders where it's
1,000 feet or so.
yeah.
In any case, yes, Wayne, I think the obvious implication here is this is a multi-level city. How many people can you put in it? The number that I just gave you is, according to the U.S. government census, their calculation, going back to 10,000 BC, that's their idea, okay? That's their starting point. When you go on the U.S. Census Bureau and you look at it, and they give these calculations about how many people have lived in the world in human history. So from that starting point down to 1950, according to the U.S. government, they brought together a number of different studies, but their calculation was that the population of the whole world was about 2.5 billion at that time. So not a whole lot of people, right? Today we have 7 billion people in the world today. I mean, there's just been a tremendous population explosion, and we don't know how much longer time will go on. In any case, God could take everybody that has ever lived on the face of the planet up to this day and have more than enough room in this city. Right? Now, think of it this way. This is once again just conjecture. Remember, Jesus told the parable? The invitation went out, and what happened? The initial guests did not come. Correct? So he sends them out, and what does he tell them to do? Go out and invite others. Then he sends them out where? Into the highways and the byways, and he says there's a reason for that. What was the reason given? The house needed to be full, right? Maybe there's a reason God hasn't come back yet. Because he wants a lot of people in this city that he's built. That's conjecture. You can do with that whatever you want to do with it. But in any case, this is a big city, and it goes up very, very high. How high is the International Space Station? 205 on average. It fluctuates. The International Space Station is maintained in a nearly circular orbit with a minimum mean altitude of 205 miles and a maximum one of 255 miles. This city is 1,500, so greater than 7 times taller than where the International Space Station is today. So if you were at the top of the New Jerusalem, you're looking way, 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 if you could see that far, down. You're way out. Well, what we know today is outer space. God's going, as we've already seen, John said, God is going to do what? He's going to recreate a new earth and a new what? And a new heaven. So the surrounding area of the earth and the earth itself are going to be completely recreated. So it's going to be an entirely different type of thing. We know, obviously from Revelation, that the New Jerusalem can fly, right? Maybe it will not stay in the same place all the time either. Don't know. Anyway, it's a really, really big city. The Hubble telescope is how high? Yeah, it's about 100 to 150 feet. You know, both of them fluctuate some. Feet, miles higher up. But even there, you're only talking about what? I mean, 3 going to 15 how many times? So 5 times the amount. So, I mean, this is a really, really high city. Think for just a minute of the amount of power that it took to get the shuttles off the ground to go up there to refurbish this thing that is not even as far as from here to Nashville, right? About 200 miles? I mean, think of all the tremendous effort and power that we put into that to try to get those machines up in the air. And this city is 1,500 miles tall. All right. Any comment on any of this? Any speculation?
You said there's 2.5 billion that have lived up through 1950, lived and died,
Right.
roughly. So, roughly what is the total today, if you're guessing?
You know, I don't know that. I didn't go that far with it. I mean, we know there's 7 billion people, and we know since 1950 there have been a couple generations. So, but still, I mean, given the size of the city, there's plenty of room, and that's the only. Yeah. So God, you know, it's not like God is trying to keep everybody out. What's God trying to do? Get everybody in, right? And He's going to get a lot of them, a lot of us, and whoever else. He's going to get us in there, isn't He? That is a lot of hope, isn't it? God's got a city, it's a big city, and He wants to fill it up.
We started off by saying that the angel took John up and he could see this city.
Yeah.
Either he had to be a long ways away or he had exceptional vision.
Well, it says that He was on a mountain and He saw it coming down. So, a lot of these things, you just have to let your imagination fill in the details. We don't really know.
Can't reach this far.
Yeah. But He does tell us a lot of things that are pretty fun. All right. The angel also measured the wall, and it was 216 feet tall. So the wall is pretty useless, isn't it? But it is defined. There's a wall, and there are gates, but the gates, as we mentioned before, are never shut. So the wall is 216 feet tall, according to the standard unit of measure which the angel was using. The wall was made of jasper, and the city itself was made of pure gold, as clear as glass. All right, so what does this place look like? Like a crystal city with a gold reflection? Yeah.
Like a place of gold and look like it's jasper and look like it's going to have like a lot of different types of gold, like different types like onyx gold, jasper, just like a different, like it says, crystals and just different types of gold. That's what it seemed like to me, like it's just going to have a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, yeah, maybe silver and gold and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
won't be able to see yourself. It's going to be so sparkly and pretty. It's, you know, you're going to be able to see like a reflection of yourself.
You know, don't you think Christians should be way ahead in their science fiction imagination? You follow what I'm saying? I mean, we know the principles. God's government is a principle of a government of love, you know, based on certain principles and so forth. I mean, obviously, sci-fi comes from a different standpoint on that. You know, it's all about who can, you know, blow who out of the air. But when it comes to some of the things like, man, what really does exist? I mean, once again, we talked about the throne of God. Can you imagine standing there looking at the throne of God? I imagine most of us will spend quite a bit of time looking at that and say, what in the world? You know? And, you know, plants, who knows what the plants will be like? And there's some weird plants that we have today, right? Do all kinds of strange things. What's that? Yeah, a lot of beautiful plants. And, be a lot of grass and plants. You know, Genesis says that we were made in the image of God. The terminology used there is actual for physical form. Now, we know we can't confine God to a form, but apparently God represents Himself in our form. You know, when you see the prophets talking, for instance, sitting on the throne of God, it says, I saw the likeness of a man sitting on the throne in Ezekiel. So God presents Himself that way. However, God has a lot of different kinds of creatures, apparently. And apparently, if we understand anything from this living throne of God, some of these creatures are intelligent creatures. Right? So not all of God's creatures, even the intelligent ones, will look like us. You're not saying a lot. It really is, isn't it? I mean, you stop and think about it. And, I mean, all of us have seen movies like Men in Black or this kind of thing, and all these weird creatures. And we say, boy, that's strange. But, hey, God is a God of imagination, isn't he? And apparently there are going to be a lot of things that to us will be very unusual and very strange.
Which sounds like a show you really don't want to miss.
Yeah. Did you hear what Wayne said? So it sounds like a show you really don't want to miss. Yeah. And you're going to be there and be part of all of it.
How can the people that are going to try to take over that ever get in their mind that they can do that after watching that come down? This evil.
Uh.
The devil must be really good motivator, convincer. He can get them convinced that they can take that city.
He convinced Adam and Eve in the beginning that they should be dissatisfied with what they have. And he used some tricky means to do it. And, Jesus warned about deception. And we spent a lot of time on that. So, we don't want to, we'll mention a little bit of it here in just a moment. But, Jesus spent a lot of time on the issues of deception. So does the book of Revelation. The devil is a deceiver, right? And I think most of us think that a number of the angels, maybe a third of them, left with him. It seems to be what Revelation indicates. And so, hey, that's pretty powerful deception. I mean, how could you be in a place like this and rebel against God? I mean, that's something really hard to wrap our minds around. And that's the reason the Bible calls it the mystery of iniquity. So I don't know. But what we do know today is the natural heart is in rebellion against God. So the redeemed, remember, are not in rebellion. The unredeemed are in rebellion against him. The devil's way has always been a way of deception. All right. The foundation stones of the city wall were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. It's interesting, isn't it? The foundation is adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, and I don't know what these things are. Do you? Emerald? I'm not even sure that the English translation properly represents what they were, but a bunch of different kinds of precious or semi-precious stones. It's a colorful place. What do you think about that? This is the honest truth. You're not going to believe me if I tell you this, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. The state of Wisconsin has a law. We lived in Wisconsin for a number of years. But the state of Wisconsin has a law that the only color you can paint your house is an earth tone. Really, I mean, they can come and arrest you for painting your house the wrong color. So everything has, it's sort of like Collierville, it has to be painted beige. or you can't have it there. But here, I mean, think of the New Jerusalem. Think now of this city, all these various color stones. What do you think of the birds are going to be like there? I mean, look how colorful the birds are here in this world. Can you imagine being in the New Jerusalem and all the colorful birds and animals that are there? What color is your house going to be?
Probably
Jasper? Okay. All right. Greenhouse. Okay, so anyway, this you have all these precious stones, all this various color that's there. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, and I do not understand that. And of course, you know, the thing that everyone says the moment they read that is, "I'd like to see the oyster." You know, so I don't know. Apparently, it appeared to be pearl. Yeah, that's all we know. God doesn't need an oyster to make a pearl anyway, does he? Okay. So the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each gate was made from a single pearl. The street of the city was of pure gold, transparent as glass. So you look through it, what do you see? I have no desire to walk down the street out front and see what's below, do you? So if it's clear, what are you looking at as you're walking down the street? Does God have rivers of fish under there? Or who knows? It's clear, it's transparent, and you walk down it. It must be a wonderful thing to take a walk in heaven. What's that? Yeah, no plumbing. Yeah, you know the sewer's not running there.
You know, I'm talking about, to me, the walls are a part of the foundation.
Okay.
City doesn't start until it's 220 feet up, and then the gates are on top of that. So, and if they're clear, I'm just kind of assuming that it would be kind of like looking through a prism, because you're looking down through the foundation.
Yeah.
The 12 different foundations, and I imagine every point that you turn, it would change colors.
You know, I think that's a really good point, that if you look at all, if this is a reflective city, and you have all the angles, every way you turn, you know, you move just a little bit, and what you thought you were looking at changes somewhat, doesn't it? It's different color, different angle, and what's that? Clouds? Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, well, it'll be a lot of gold, so, you know, I guess we can, you know, be dressed. But how are we going to be dressed? Because I know when Adam and Eve, you know, they were.
We're not going there. She was just saying, she's concerned about how we're going to be dressed. I'm not concerned about that. God's original intention was that we were not dressed, okay? We understand that. What his intention is up there, we don't know. The Bible talks about robes, but we know that's a metaphorical expression about character and so forth. We really have no idea of, you know, the dress code of heaven, all right? Okay, but here we've got all this transparent glass. I did not see a temple in the city because its temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. So no concept of a church building any longer. That's all gone. Why?
We don't need a building.
That you got, your God is right there. So there are a couple things. One is, as we noted, I think it was last week, there's no longer any religious instruction, is there? There's no need for religious instruction. And God is with us, and as we noted last week, we are his people. So there's no need to have a place to go meet God or to get religious instruction, those kinds of things. That'd be pretty nice, wouldn't it? Because today we only live partly in the reality. Paul talks about this. He talks about it as two adoptions. We have today been adopted, according to Paul, into the kingdom of Christ, but we are not here yet. When we're there, that will be the final adoption, or as Paul calls it, the second adoption. And so, you know, we have this kind of dual reality that we live in today. But when we get in the kingdom, we will be in the full reality of God's presence and what heaven is like. And so there's no longer any thinking about salvation, about redemption, about what is... Can you imagine now, you're on the other side of this time, from the transition from here into this city, and you're in that city. You no longer are thinking about salvation. You're no longer thinking about, what does God require of me? Or when Jesus comes, and all of that, you're not going to think about it. It's all done. So then what? All of those religious things are past. And now we live in the reality with God. And we live in the reality of praising Him for what He has done and what He continues to do for us and to bless us and so forth. But whole different dynamic. What would a prayer session be like in heaven? There is no prayer session, right? Yeah, praise. But we're not going to get together and say, "Dear Lord, give us our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors," right? None of that. Prayer becomes meaningless. There's no reason for it because we are now there with God. And, we don't, all of our needs are taken care of. The city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine on it. So we don't have to worry about the height of the city getting up there and getting in conflict with something, because they don't exist. Those bodies around us don't exist. I don't know what God is going to do with that. But we know that, when we look at prophecy and the return of Jesus, what takes place? On the earth, every mountain and island are moved out of their place, but what else happens? The heavens are rolled back as a scroll, it says. So we don't know what God is going to do here, how He's going to work all of this out. As John says, there's no need of the sun there because the Lamb is there, and God is there, and they are the light of the city. And so the sun now becomes irrelevant. So now we have a different type of system that God is using to keep the planet in space. I'm not real concerned about it because if He can fly a 1,500-mile building like a spaceship, I think He can probably take care of the rest of it. But anyway, it's a different system, right? Today we are dependent on gravity, and what the sun does and what the moon does to hold us in place and to give us life, keep our atmosphere in place, and all of those kinds of things. But there, it's going to be a different system that God has. The city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it because the glory of God shines on it, and the Lamb is its lamp. The people of the world will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their wealth to it. The gates of the city will stand open all day. They will never be closed. So once again, why the gates of pearl? I don't know, but they're there. They'll never be closed. But maybe they're symbolic. That the gates of this city are always open. In the earth, the gates serve what purpose? To keep the enemy out, right? But now there's no enemy, so the gates are open. Maybe that's what it means. The gates of the city stand open all day. They will never be closed because there will be no night there. No bad guys, no night. Are you going to be happy to get rid of sleep? Most of us are pretty lazy today. We can't wait for the opportunity for, right? You sit down at night and what happens? You sit down and watch TV, what happens? Got one eye open, one eye closed. One on the clock, yeah, it's about time now, right? So many times, you're the same way. You're looking at something. I would say to myself, man, I'm just going to lay my head down just for a minute here, and then I'll be okay. Don't wake up till the next morning, right? So. It's interesting. Yes, we're going to be different. There's no question. Paul talks about the glorious body that we have, and he says that it is like the glorious body with which Jesus had. We know that Jesus, after the resurrection, remember what he said to Thomas? The disciples were afraid he was a ghost, right? Yeah. And he says, look, touch me. I'm real. So I think there's both. At the same time, Jesus could disappear and walk through walls, correct? I can't do that, not without some serious consequences. So, yes, we will be different. Our bodies will be different, but yet there is also still a physical reality. So, all right. The greatness and the wealth of the nations will be brought into the city, but nothing that is impure will enter into the city. Think about that for just a moment.
The implication, though, is that there's impurities outside the city, which is a little bit odd.
Well, you know, it doesn't focus. It says that he recreates a new heaven and a new earth. But the only focus here is on the city. You follow what I'm saying? So it would seem to me that he's saying that in this city there won't be anything impure. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, we do know that the impure have been what? They've been destroyed. So I would take that, Glenn, as being comparative. You know, in this earth we have all kinds of impurity in the cities, right? In this city, you know, that's not going to happen. Any case, some of these things aren't perfectly clear. Only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life of the living will enter into the city. And we've seen that over and over again in the book of Revelation. How do we get in the Lamb's Book of Life? By our deeds or by His? By His deeds and His deeds alone, correct? So that will give us the right to enter the city. So the ticket into heaven is what? What Jesus did on the cross, correct? That's our ticket. But the fearful and the unbelieving, I'm not going to, we've talked about some of these coming through in Revelation, so I chose not tonight to develop those, but we could really develop those. There's so many passages in the Bible about the fearful and the unbelieving. The fearful, one good comparative, and I pointed this out before. Do you remember John in the little book of 1 John? Remember he says that perfect love does what? Cast out fear. So if you are fearful, what? You don't love God. Correct? That's the reason I've been so hard on some ways that Adventists have taught things in the past. I'm not talking about the church officially. I'm talking about, and you know what I mean, you know, about how things have been applied, unfortunately, by too many people. But the fearful and those that do not believe and the abominable. Is the beast in his group, are they abominable? Remember, they tried to murder, destroy God's people, etc., etc. Then the murderers, the whoremongers, the sorcerers, the idolaters, the liars. If you look at these things, this describes the rebellion of the people in the Old Testament. Remember, we keep going back, and we've done this so many times, looking at Isaiah, Jeremiah, etc., and seeing these comparisons. This is what God's people were like in the Old Testament, and in the book of Revelation, those that are in rebellion against God are the same way, correct? Remember that they set up the idol, they command everyone to worship the idol, etc., etc. And liars. This is the deception thing once again. Remember, the beast that's like a lamb does what? He deceives the whole world. By what means? By the miracles that he was able to do. And so, you know, he was deceiving the world to gather them together against God. They shall have their part, and we've already seen this, and we've looked at those that are in the lake of fire. But they shall have their part in the lake of fire, which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second what? No second chance, right? Where's all the second chance theology come from? There's a lot of that in the world around us. There's no second chance. God's going to have a universe that's clean. For without are dogs. That's too bad. I like dogs. I have a little Chihuahua and a standard poodle. I've had all kinds of dogs. I like dogs. I am really sad God's going to leave the dogs outside the kingdom. Aren't you? Obviously, that literally doesn't literally mean dogs, does it? Okay. What's that? No. I'm not going there. All right. For without our dogs, we'll come back to it in just a moment. Paul kind of explains that for us. And sorcerers and warmongers and murderers and idolaters. Once again, that same group of people that we've already referenced. And whoever loves and makes a lie. Once again, those deceivers. Now, this is Philippians. Notice we've gone back to Paul. Look out, Paul says, for the dogs. What he's talking about here, he's talking about people within the church. You know, Paul was attacked all the time. And there are just scores of passages. And I chose not to develop this tonight either, but just kind of in passing. If you look at Paul, Paul was continually hounded, to use one of our expressions, by different ones within the community of believers that he had raised up. So he goes in, he raises up these churches, and then there are people within them that start attacking him for all kinds of different reasons. So Paul says, look out for the dogs. What do the dogs do? Do you ever turn your back on a dog? If you walk down the street and a dog starts running out at you, do you turn your back on it? No. Not if you're smart. What do? You turn. You run? You're not going to outrun the dog. So what do? You turn around and look at it, don't you? And you take it on face to face, or try to climb up on something where it can't reach you. You know, look out for the dogs. Paul is talking here. If you go back and look at the context of this, Paul is talking about people now. And throughout, if you look at Paul does not have a lot of good to say about these kind of people. Paul actually has a lot of negative to say about them. Look out for the dogs, Paul says. Look out for the evildoers. Look out for those who mutilate the flesh. And we could talk about, he's probably there talking about circumcision. We know that he had the Judaizer Christians, and they were always coming along behind Paul and criticizing him and creating difficulty. But going back to where we were, the dogs are going to be where? You know, the dogs are going to be outside the city. All right. I'm sorry. Yeah, John's talking about the same thing. Talking about the exact same type of people. What's that? No. I was just joking about the dogs. I'm sorry. I do that to Jack all the time. Jack has learned now. I mean, he looks at me, everything I say, he says, "Are you serious, Papa?" And no wonder, for even Satan, he says, disguises himself how? As an angel of light. And so Paul says, you know, these dogs are pretty clever. This is a different passage, but he's talking about the same thing here. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their ends will correspond to their deeds. Now, Paul was always, you know, these people that are always following Paul around, and Paul was an unrighteous person. And so they were continually attacking him. And now, just like John, he says their end will correspond to what? Their deeds. And we have seen that all through Revelation. What is, you know, the cup, God says what? What the Babylon has given out, what are they going to receive in turn? They're going to receive the same thing in turn, but even more so, right? And we've seen that throughout this last part of Revelation. All right. Well, we'll leave it there for tonight. Any other take on heaven? Now that we've had a little bit of time, any wild imagination about what this place is going to be like? Now that you know that God is just, infinite in his thinking, what's yours about what you're going to encounter there?
When you go into the future, things change.
All right.
Clothing, technology,
Right.
with computers and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. When we go to heaven, it's going to be entirely different, like we're going back on time to the earlier days. You know what I'm saying? Without all that, it's going to be a big change.
Okay. What's that? Well, now his thinking is that we're not going to have computers in heaven. I kind of agree with that because I think they will be really primitive. It would be an abacus, right? Who wants it? Who needs it? We'll probably have something far superior.
What I believe, because we were created to worship and praise him, and because we praise him now, but it's not going to, but once we get, in his presence, I think it's going to be so glorious. It's going to, see, on earth, it's about Christ, but it's about every other things. We got all these distractions, so I think they're going to be a place where we're not going to have no distractions and no hindrances, and I think it's going to be a place where we can worship and praise God and, and just enjoy, walking around, and just enjoy everything and looking at people, whom we saw and maybe fellowshipping a little bit. But it's mainly going to be about him and, God and us just praising and doing what he wants us to do.
Right.
Pretty much that's what I
I think you're right. You ever go to a new place? I'm sorry. Yeah. And this is a good point. God created us for what reason? Well, not just to worship him. God created us because he loves us and he wants us to have a good time. And this runs counter to the way that many Christians at times over the years have encountered their relationship with God. It's like God doesn't want me to have any fun, and the more miserable I am, the more holy I am. But
I used to think, this cloud business was up there playing on a harp.
yeah.
And to me, that was boring.
Yeah, that'd be really boring, really fast. Yeah, I agree. But God wants us to have fun. And so, I can only imagine. I don't think any of us really, if you didn't have some of the burdens and responsibilities of maintaining yourself in this world and getting through life, and I'm not, I enjoy life, but you got to admit, this life, you've got to work really hard. You've got to, make sure you keep food on your table. You've got to do all of those kinds of things. You get sick. You've got to try to stay well. And then after you've done all that, you die. Correct? All right. That's kind of the miserable side of life. I'm sorry for that picture. But in heaven, we don't have any of that. So what do we spend our time doing? We don't spend our time praising God all the time. Solomon said, do not be overly religious. We can't love God too much. That's not what he's talking about. But the practice of religion is only part of our lives. Correct? There's not one of us that stays on our knees and prays all the time. Right? Because God made us, the primary principle, God made us to have fun. So you have all of eternity without the encumbrances of this life. You have all of eternity to have fun. It's one great party. Now that doesn't mean that we don't learn. I mean, if you don't learn anything, you're not really having fun, right? I mean, the new experiences and so forth. And so we have all of eternity to do that. And because God is a God of imagination, I think that probably no matter how long eternity is, which we can't imagine, but ever how long that is, we will never run out of new and fun things to do that will intrigue us and keep our interest. One of the frustrations of this life is that we do not have enough time to pursue all the interests that we really would like to. Right? I'm looking forward to getting into heaven. And I can be a microbiologist, and I can do that for a couple billion years. And then I can switch over to chemistry, right? And after that, I can become an astronomer. You know, a lot of things we can do.
One observation, the Bible from Genesis clear to the end of Revelation talks about sin and how important it is. This points out why.
Yeah.
Because no sin is ever going to enter that 1,500 mile square city.
No sin, no sin. We'll never have anything else ever to worry about again. Don't ever have to worry about going to the doctor. Sorry. Hey, look, you're out of business. I'm out of business. Most of us here are out of business, right? Because whatever we do here has no relevance there. All right, well, it's time to go. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And anyone willing to pray for us and have a closing prayer? Anyone? All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for just a little bit of glimpse of what heaven can be like. Lord, I pray that you impress upon our minds the joy that we will have, and we will find solace in just praising you and giving you glory. Lord, there are those on our sick list, those that are grieving, each one of us have, and lift those up right now. Pray that you would be with them, healing and comfort. Pray that you give us traveling mercies as we go home tonight. Lord, we pray that you would continue to bless the pastor with knowledge that he can pass on to us. Lord, open up our minds that we can absorb. For ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Glenn. Well, have a good night. Hope to see you Sabbath. Uh-huh.
Give it a few weeks till everybody gets back from vacation and preach this as a sermon some Sabbath.
Sure, can do that.
I mean, people get excited about a thing like this.
We'll do it. We'll do that. Hey, so good to see you tonight. Glad you could get away and be here.
Yeah, and I started back at the school, so I got to go to be at work in the morning, but I'm so glad.
Yeah, I know, but thank you for being here.
And it's always a pleasure. I learn something from you every day.
Thank you. Yeah, you by yourself last week? How you doing? Good to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be back. Puppy and I are both well.
You got one of these too, huh? All right. Welcome.